Alright, today I want to talk about a cross-section of what I do here in the shop between guns and knives. That's what I cover and work with and do most of the time here in shop, is either guns or knives. And one of the questions that I get asked the most often by people who may be knife people, may not be knife people, or people that are just learning about it, is what is a hamon? Right there. What is that? What is that thing that's going on in the blade? See if we can... Oh, not gonna do it. Is that a hamon? That's a hamon. Honey, look, that's a hamon. That's ancient Chinese Damascus. That's Damascus right there. That's a Damascus hamon. Alright, welcome back to the channel again. Thank you for joining me today. We talk about one of the most asked questions I get, and that is, what is a hamon? Whether it's at the table, whether it's online or whatever, and things I'm doing, you know, with social media and that kind of thing. Hamon is this little line right here in the blade that you can see that is the indicator of a differential hardening treatment done to a blade when you're actually hardening it, quenching it or whatever, to create two different types of hardness in the steel. So historically, going back, the biggest reference you can find to hamons being used in historical context is actually with Japanese bladesmithing, with katanas and tantos and swords like that. Something like this right here. This one's a hot mess. I gotta rewrap the tsukamaki. The Ito has come undone, so I've gotta redo all that, so it broke. But this type of blade right here, this is where you most often traditionally see a hamon. Now, I've not found a whole lot of historical reference for other cultures doing it, so it is almost always associated with Japanese bladesmithing. And the hamon process, very simply, is using clay. When you're actually getting ready to heat treat your blade, when you're going to harden it, you use clay and you put that along the spine of the blade so that it is resistant to the heat from the forge or the kiln or whatever you're putting it in. And then when you quench, it is also resistant to hardening. So that process creates two distinct and different hardness profiles within the steel itself. You'll have a much harder edge, so it's made for sharpening and holding an edge and toughness and retention and all those good things of the actual edge, so you get your maximum hardness along the edge. The spine will be a different hardness level that is much lower than that, because it will not be exposed to the quenchant as much or as rapidly cooling down, the same as the blade edge is. Why that matters is it kind of adds a little bit of a spring temper or a flexibility, if you will, to the spine of the blade. And where that can matter in a blade like this is with impact. And so in a nutshell, you want a hard edge on your blade so they can cut, so they can hold an edge, you can get through stuff and it will hold up over time and use and stuff like that. But if you have a softer spine, especially in longer blades like this, then the blade overall will be more resistant to impact and lateral stress and stuff like that, less likely to break or chip. So you're giving your blade almost the characteristics of what you'd see in the leaf springs of a car or vehicle, something like that, along the spine, so it can move, it can flex, it can go back to memory, stuff like that. But the edge is hard enough, and the balance between the two, so you have like this kind of matrix going on between the two of these things. The balance between the two provides a way to make a blade that will just take more damage. It just will take more impact and stuff like that. So practically, what do I use a hamon for today? Well, in longer blades like this tanto I've been working on for, you know, multiple years now. Honestly, I've had this heat treated on the bench for a very long time. I kept messing up the habaki here, so I've had to restart it several times, and I actually have one that I think is going to functionally work really well. So I'm going to finish this out this year, hopefully. In a longer blade like this, it's going to just make sure it doesn't break in battle. At the end of the day, it's going to keep your blade alive. You can keep your blade useful and you know, functional for you longer periods of time. The shorter blades, stuff like this one that I just finished this week, this is a little hunting knife I just finished, and I call it the Gambles, like a little Gambles quail. I don't know really why, I just kind of picked that name out of the hat when I was, you know, fooling around with this. I'll get some better shots in here. But when I was fooling around with this design, there's a lot of Gambles quail around where I live, and they were running all over my yard and stuff like that. It's like, oh, that's kind of a fun little name. So we're gonna name this little guy the Gambles. This is a new one, just finished. Basic, simple hunting knife. What would you use a hamon for in something like this? Well, it can add the benefits of structural toughness, you know, meaning lateral stress and stuff like that. It'll take it a lot better, less likely to break or chip overall, you know, throughout the entire course of the blade, or the whole, you know, length and depth of the blade. Your edge is razor sharp. So you're looking at 61 to 62 Rockwell. This is W2 tool steel, which is what I predominantly use for my high carbon knives, because it is one of the best steels out there for making hamons in, honestly. And it's a fantastic steel. It's a tool steel. But why do you need a hamon in a small blade like this? Well, looks. Just for looks. It looks cool. I mean, it just looks cool. It does serve a functional purpose. It actually still serves the same functional purpose as what a traditional Japanese katana would. But in something this small, it's not exactly necessary, but it does look cool. Adds a little character, and every knife is different. That's one of the beautiful aspects of hamon is they all come out a little bit different, and so you get a little different look and a little bit different characteristics and personality to each blade as you create them, and it can create something kind of unique for each customer that buys the blade or whatever. Everybody's got something a little different. So functionally, it's not as important in a blade like this, structurally wise and all those things, but it does look cool, and it does add a little bit element of toughness to the thing, and you know, gives it some personality, gives it a signature, gives it an identity that's unique to itself. Not every hamon is the same. They all kind of turn out a little bit different in the heat treat, and you can drive the pattern of a hamon to a certain extent depending on the type of clay you use and how you actually apply it. The clay is very simple. The clay itself is not a super complicated thing. It's satinite, whatever you want to call it. It's just this powder. You mix it with water and stuff like that, and how you mix the powder, how you apply the powder, or the clay once it's made, can kind of drive what that hamon looks like when you heat treat it. Now it's almost impossible to get like an exact design in a hamon, but you can get pretty darn close. Now, why would you not do just a straight hamon? Let's ask that question. There are a few historical examples out there you see where there's a Japanese tanto or whatever, wakizashi, katana, whatever, that has a straight line. It's that straight line differentiating the light from dark, the hard from soft. And it looks cool and it is functional, but why you wouldn't do that is because the clay application in the hamon, the wave in the line, actually serves a functional purpose as well of stopping splits if they happen, stopping a crack. If a crack happens, it has to, if it's traveling up laterally, you know, through the blade like this, it will stop it at the hamon, and if the hamon is straight, then it may cause that crack to travel laterally this way and that kind of thing. So you split your whole blade basically. If you get a bad enough crack in a blade, you can destroy the whole thing going down that hamon. So if you add waves in there, and this is just what I can glean from historical reference, I've not tested this personally, but if there are waves in your hamon, then it stops the advance of any cracks like that right where they form in battle or combat or in stress or whatever, like that kind of thing. So you can actually save more of the blade that way. Say if you have a crack that starts to form from an impact closer to the edge here, well, you actually still have a lot of usable blade back here, you know, and in a combat situation or in a fight situation or whatever, you don't want your whole blade cracking off of one piece of battle damage, you know what I mean? Because you may have a lot more fight to go, right? So the wave in the hamon, from what I understand and can glean from historical reference, is to maximize toughness and maximize the ability to stop and resist cracks from spreading throughout the blade. So in a nutshell, that is what a hamon does. It provides structural strength and flexibility to a rigid edge. You know what I mean? It backs up the rigid edge with structural flexibility and strength and toughness. And it is not, I can't think of any other historical references for it being used in other societies other than Japanese society. I'm not saying that it wasn't. It's just most well known and associated with that. Now, how do you actually get that look out of the blade? Because this is not just a surface pattern. The hamon is not a surface pattern like Damascus. When you think about Damascus, all the waves and lines and all the things going on, it's an etched pattern that you see on the surface because of different types of steel being woven together, or, you know, meshed together, melded together. So you're actually looking at 2 different types of steel or 3 different types of steel in a Damascus pattern, and you see it best when you etch it because they etch at different rates, and that's why one will stick out more than the other, is brighter or lighter or darker. So in a hamon, it's not a surface pattern either, though. This is where I think some of the confusion comes in for people. They look at the hamon on the knife and they think that it's going to rub off, or that it's just a surface pattern that's painted on or etched on or whatever, that it just has to do with looks visually on the surface of the steel, and it actually doesn't. If you use the right type of steel, there are only certain types of steel that will do this, high carbons and tool steels that will do this. They're called shallow hardening steels. They're hyper-eutectoid steels. It's a fancy word. I don't actually know what it means. You use the certain types of steel and they'll work really well. 1095 and W2 work fantastic for this. You can get a little bit of a Hamon in 1084, but it's a little bit deeper hardening, I think. So maybe that's the wrong word for it. Anyway, the shallow hardening steels like W2 tool steel, that's going to be our primary example. They only harden within a millimeter or two of the actual surface of the knife when you quench it. So if you weren't to put any clay on this at all, and you were just to get it up to where the edge itself thoroughly is only about 1450 to 1475 degrees, and then quench it, you would actually get a Hamon out of it even without clay. And I've done that with a sword before. The edge was the only thing that got high enough in temperature to harden, and in only a certain amount, so a millimeter or two within the steel. So the shallow hardening steels are best for making Hamons with. And when you actually do the Hamon and you harden and heat treat, the reason it's not a surface effect, it's not actually just something that you see on the surface visually of the knife, is because the steel itself from one zone to the next, so from the hardened edge to the softer spine, is actually different molecularly. It looks different under a microscope. It will break and crack and grain different and stuff like that. So that pattern actually goes all the way through the knife. It's not surface. It goes all the way through. It is fully comprised in and of the steel itself. How you bring that out is an etching process. Now, the etching and polishing processes for bringing a Hamon out can vary. I use ferric chloride to bring my etches out. So you get the knife cleaned up, you get your finish on it up to about 800 grit is what I usually go, and then you etch it, and you etch it for a couple cycles, a couple seconds each, 10 to 15 seconds each cycle, like 3 times. And I brush it off with a very fine grained steel wool. I kind of brush off the surface decarbonization that happens when you put it in the etch, or whatever you call it. So I'll brush that off real quick and then dip it back in, and brush it off, dip it in again. And then after that process, you have kind of a really dark, murky looking blade, and you can see the Hamon real clear and everything. And then you go back and you polish it. And I polish with flits or mauls or something like that, just to metal polish it. And you just get on the surface and you just polish until all of that, I guess you could say, smoky, grainy, dark burning from the edge, acid, is polished off, and you have just your smooth steel left. And then you have, a differentially hardened blade that portrays the Hamon really well, because the polish that you put on a hardened piece of steel versus the polish that you can do on a softer piece of steel is going to look different. And right along that line, that little, that little zone there, oh, there we go, you can kind of see that. There we go. So that zone right there, that little dark line, that's where those two different steel matrices are meeting and stuff like that. And the polish has brought that out with the etch. Another popular technique, and this is a more traditional Japanese technique, is using stones to polish these. And the stones have some acidity in them. So there may actually be a little bit of an acidic process to that polishing technique that they use for Japanese swords traditionally. I don't know 100% if they add acid to the water they use, because they're using water-based stone and they're polishing, different directions and stuff like that. It can be months-long processes to actually polish a full katana out and do it the right way and work their way up in stones. And I've heard that the stones they use go up to 8,000 grit or more, comparative to, what you would sandpaper or whatever. And the process itself of just polishing the blade, putting the final finish on it, is what brings the Hamon out. And you can actually get different looks from Hamon. I've tried some different stuff in the past. You can try lemon juice. You can try etching and then re-sanding and repolishing up to like 2,000 or 3,000 grit. And then he brings out kind of a lighter, wispier white Hamon. They call that the ashi, I think, is the effect you get when you have like this wispy white cloudy look along the edge of your Hamon. It's harder to bring out. It's harder for, I know some guys out there that have really perfected that technique, but I've had a harder time doing that personally, just getting that effect. So I really kind of go with a basic etch and then simple polish and call it type of thing. Now, I did have one knife I was fooling around with years ago that I etched and polished it multiple times because I just kept messing up the finish. So I would resand it, and I noticed the more I etched it, a couple processes in, and then I polished it, and then I sanded it with like 2,000 or 3,000 grit, it started to bring out the white, Hamon wispy ashiness around the edge, which I haven't been able to replicate simply or quickly yet. I've got some processes I'm working on right now to try to do that with a couple higher end knives that I'm working on. I might actually change my etching too. I might use lemon juice or coffee or something like that with a polishing process to see if I can't bring out more dynamic vibrancy in the hamon itself. So in a nutshell, that is what a hamon is. It is an indicator of a differential hardening process using clay on the spine of the knife to keep the back from getting as hard as the edge. In a nutshell, there it is, simple as it gets. It's not a Damascus process. Damascus is an entirely different process. It's not a surface process. It's not a surface treatment. Some of the cheesier, cheaper knives you see out there, the made in Chinesium type of stuff, the katanas or whatever, they do actually acid etch a hamon into the blade. So they're using a mono steel, so it's all the same hardness, but then they'll acid etch the wavy line thing in the blade, or they'll even, grind it in there. Some of them have like sanded it with, fine grit sand or whatever. You can sand it in there and that kind of thing. So I've seen people do that, but that usually is only the cheap Chinesium stuff coming from overseas. And not a real hamon process. All right, I hope that cleared it up for some of you out there that have that question. It is one of the questions I get the most at the table and just in general when I'm telling people about my knives, or they come here to the shop and they look at it and like, hey, what is that little wavy line thingy, like I explained the process. So this is I guess the best, most basic explanation I can give for that. All right, if you have any other questions, leave them in the comments below. Thank you for joining me again today. Keep your knives sharp, keep your powder dry, and keep your magazines loaded. Y'all have a good day.